Now, Donald Trump will decide on whether the United States will join the Iran-Israel conflict in the next 2 weeks.
Well, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has read out a message from Trump after what she called a lot of speculation about if the U.S. would be directly involved in the conflict.
Now, she said, quoting Trump, that the decision will be made within the next 2 weeks, as there is still a substantial chance of talks to end the conflict.
Regarding the ongoing situation in Iran, I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks."
A senior intelligence source and a Defense Department official cited by CBS said the U.S. president has approved attack plans on Iran but has not made a final decision on whether to strike the country and formally join Israel's air campaign.
Now, this report said that Trump has been briefed on both the risks and the benefits of bombing Iran's Fordo nuclear facility. And he believes that he doesn't have much choice. Finishing the job means destroying Fordo, he said. Fordo is the heart of the Iranian nuclear program, built deep inside a mountain and protected by strong air defenses. It houses uranium enriched up to 60%, just below the level needed to make a nuclear bomb.
Now, The Guardian on Wednesday claimed that the U.S. military has reservations regarding the success of using a bunker-buster bomb to eliminate Fordo. Now, two defense officials were reportedly briefed that only a tactical nuclear weapon could reach the facility. However, it was reported that Trump is not considering using a tactical nuke.
However, on Thursday, Fox News senior White House correspondent Joachim Heinrich reported that he was told otherwise. He said top officials told him that none of the options are off the table, and the U.S. military is very confident that bunker busters could get the job done at Fordo.
And for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report from New York. Take a look.
As tensions in the Middle East climb, the White House is walking a tightrope between pressure and restraint. President Donald Trump has seemingly paused any immediate strike against Iran, saying that he will decide within 2 weeks whether or not to intervene in the Israel-Iran escalation. That would be until about July 3rd. He emphasized diplomacy, notably the upcoming talks in Europe, while also maintaining that military options are open, reaffirming that a nuclear-capable Iran is unacceptable. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt echoed those comments, saying that President Trump prefers diplomacy, but also insists that Iran must end uranium enrichment. Any future deals, she stressed, must eliminate enrichment entirely. So for now, Washington is holding back. But Trump's demand for unconditional surrender from Tehran signals that this pause may be short-lived. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council is expected to hold an emergency meeting on Friday regarding the Israel-Iran conflict here in New York. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION, World is One.
All right, for more on this, we're now being joined live by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. He's a military expert and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us on World Day, and again, always a pleasure to have you. And I just want to begin by asking, what is your assessment of where things stand in West Asia at the moment and the United States' involvement in this?
Well, it's really anybody's guess. Trump said it best himself. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know that anybody knows, because on the 1 minute it looked like we were really getting close to an attack. I had heard from several sources that claimed to have access to some of the senior government officials in Washington. They thought that there would be an American attack before the end of the weekend. They thought it was something close to a sure deal, and then Trump upended that earlier today by saying, no, how about 2 more weeks later from now? So the big question is, though, why this delay? Is that because he's genuinely going to give diplomacy a chance and wants to give one more shot at it? Or is it because, which is certainly plausible, that the military moves were not yet ready, that they needed to move some more folks out, possibly out of the Qatar air base that you mentioned a minute ago. So, some of the troops in Syria have been redeploying and getting out. It could be that they're trying to make us less vulnerable before we go into attack, or it could be diplomacy. It could. No one knows for sure which it is, but all options are on the table, as they say.
Right, so and having said that, we know that as America's closest ally, Britain is almost certain to be affected in more ways than one. And now if Donald Trump does decide to get involved, and overtly this time, what role could the UK play coming in the escalation, how it's going forward, and what role would the UK be playing in it?
Well, that's uncertain, because there's a number of things they could do. Air power seems to be the biggest and the most likely case. That's what happened. I believe it was in the April of 2024, the first time Iran used missiles and drones to attack into to Israel in response to the attack where Israel destroyed the embassy in Syria. So it could be something like that. It could also be some naval power. Definitely could be intelligence capabilities. So all kinds of situations and possibilities. The big question, though, for the UK they've got to ask is, what is in their national interest, and is it useful to go into something that, and certainly many analysts, I'm definitely one of them, think that this is a no-win situation. That going into Iran now could expand the war, could make more people join into it, certainly draw the United States in. Because there's plenty of bases that we have in the Middle East. You can redeploy some folks, but you certainly can't get rid of all of them. We got bases all over the place, and all of them would be at risk. And of course, if Britain joins in, they would also be at risk. And it seems pretty likely that Iran would take some British assets under fire if they came in. So everybody has to calculate: is it worth going into to try and take out an Iranian nuclear facility, especially the one at Fordo, if it may not even be succeeded, but in fact gets you killed in the process and get your country into a war? That's something I think has not been given enough thought to.
Right now, Mr. Davis, I also wanted to ask you, we are seeing somewhat a shift in position. Netanyahu has been saying that this is also for the Iranian people, it's an opportunity for them. He said this recently, that they oppressed them for 46 years, they've yearned for freedom, 80% of the people would throw these theological thugs out. Then we also said Putin say that Israeli strikes have actually led to a consolidation of Iranian society around its leadership. And now we're hearing that Netanyahu is saying that actually regime change was never the goal to begin with. This is an existential war for us, and it's the nuclear threat, and what actually happens in Iran is up to the Iranian people. So how do you assess this back and forth? Or is it that perhaps Netanyahu has some assessment of the fact that that's not how it's going to work?
Well, I think it's more the practical aspect of, because it was earlier today, this very day, when an apartment, a hospital was hit in Israel, and he stood before everybody and said that the leader of Iran must die. He cannot continue to live. And so that seemed to be pretty much, yeah, we're going for regime change. And then, of course, as you pointed out, then there was some very mixed messages that came out later on to imply some different things. And listen, this comment about, I'm talking to the Iranian people, and they may come up with some percentage that they're against the Iranian regime. Most of that is just misinformation and attempt to create human opinions that people can have both within Israel to bolster that, within the United States, within the Western world, and in a vain attempt to try and sway some people in Iran. But I don't think anybody's buying it. There's no doubt that there are some people, a significant number, that do not like the regime and would love to see it go away. But from some that I've talked to, the idea that they want to basically help Netanyahu kill their way to it is not something that they're very keen on, because even though they don't like that regime, they certainly don't like the Israeli regime that's killing, in their view, the Palestinian people in large numbers, or now they're attacking Iran. So I don't think that's going to work very well for Israel.
Right, so and Prime Minister Netanyahu has time and again and unequivocally said that the civilians will be held accountable for the actions of the government. And it has also said that we'll keep going on with the offensive for as long as it takes. Now the question is, what could the timeline be like, and for just how long can either side sustain this conflict? Let's start with Israel.
That's actually the great question is how long can either one of them maintain this? And Israel is definitely not in a position to where it can just indefinitely go on because, number one, it itself is very much limited on its own industrial capacity, its ability to create especially these high-tech interceptor missiles, the offensive missiles that go both from aircraft and from launchers. They're very limited in that. So there's already in the Wall Street Journal yesterday was a report that Israel's already running low of interceptor missiles. The question is, how is Iran doing? How many long-range missiles do they have? I suspect, and from the best sources that I can consult, is that they have probably a significant number. And I think right now, based on the video evidence, they've been firing a lot of their older stuff first because a lot of the warheads will disintegrate as they're coming in, which, by the way, even they're not being intercepted. And if Israel is reserving some portion of its best stuff, then that means they have more more punishment that they can mete out. And then the real question is, when will Iran then bring in their long-range drones, which they have tens of thousands of reportedly, and only a handful have been used so far. So it could be that they're trying to saturate the air with some of these expendable missiles to get rid of the interceptor missiles, and then when they get low, they can come in with the next round in multiple waves, which can suck down more. And if they get to a point to where even periodic, in local areas that the Israeli side runs out, then they're going to be very vulnerable in an area. So Israel is not in as strong a position as a lot of people think, and I think the military inside of Israel has to really take this into account before they decide just how far can they go.
Right, so, and then of course coming to Iran, and we know that it's hard to say for sure at this point, but what do you think is the strategy here, like with Israel and now with US just 2 weeks away from joining in? Do you think the US is just letting Israel batter Iran out to the point where it could be strong-armed into coming back to the negotiating table, but for a US brokered peace this time and on US's terms? Does that seem to be the strategy at play here?
It certainly could be, and that's a plausible position to have, but it's also a risky one. Look, if you wanted a negotiated settlement, if the U.S. wanted one, there was one on the table before all of this explosions happened, before Israel launched its preemptive war, because the Iranian side said, yes, we're willing to have a negotiation. We'll consider nearly anything except the enrichment. We won't go to zero. And under international law, there's no one that can tell them they can't do that. They said that's a sovereign right, but they said we will give on other things. But then President Trump made that a red line and said, well, if you don't go to zero, then we're not going to have a deal. And of course, under international law, you can't go and attack a country just because they don't take the policy that you want them to on an area where there's an international treaty that allows them to have limited reprocessing. So we'll see if that's going to work, but then it's going to be a question of, Iran, for them to succeed, their big strategy is they just have to not be defeated. Whereas Israel has to have either a regime change or they have to knock out their nuclear facilities. If they don't do either of those, then it's a strategic loss for Israel, whereas Iran has to just hang on. So the standard for Iran to succeed is lower than the one that Israel has now set for itself.
Mr. Davis, I'm glad you mentioned that because it actually now brings into question Israel's strategic objectives, or whether or not it's been able to achieve it, or whether or not it can achieve it at all. We were speaking to Professor James A. Russell earlier as well, who said that you cannot simply bomb Iran's nuclear program out of existence. And we do know, you're absolutely right, that there were negotiations on the table. They were having discussions. They might have been at an impasse, but Iran did make it clear that when it comes to the nuclear program, completely dismantling it, that would be a red line for them. Then we see Operation Rising Lion being launched. And if we were to talk about Netanyahu's comments about Iran being very close to having a nuclear warhead, these are comments we've been hearing perhaps every year since 1996, and this really brings into question whether the red line defense model or the preemptive strikes defense model, that is something that we're seeing a complete breakdown of in West Asia.
Yeah, and listen, that's a great point you bring up. How can we all forget those many times when Netanyahu was at the UN Security Council General Assembly and he holds up that big picture of a bomb and said that, they're right up into the neck, they're almost going to get there, they're weeks away, and yet the weeks pass, the years pass, and they don't get one. And then now here again, after launching this and saying that we had to act now, he still says, well, it could have been a year or even more, but he said that's beside the point. No, that's not beside the point. That is the point. You say you don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, and yet they didn't have one by all accounts. They didn't have one. And so now then you have to get to what was really the objective. And that's why I say the evidence seems more likely that Israel wanted to have a regime change than they did actually to prevent a nuclear weapons breakout, which even the U.S. intelligence said was not on the table just as recently as March.
That's very interesting because, of course, if the regime change was the goal, which it did appear to be for a long time until this latest statement came out, the next obvious question would have been, of course, what's the plan for the day after? And from the experts that we have spoken to about this as well, well, they didn't seem to have an answer for everyone that I asked as well. They said that, well, that's up to the Iranian people, and that's pretty much echoed in Netanyahu's recent statement as well. So that what you're saying does make sense there. Lieutenant Colonel Davis, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. As you know, it's always a pleasure to have you on with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.